what got me through that was my son and I had a conversation 2 weeks before he passed. He was in the Middle East at the time. And what helped me get through it was we had a conversation. He said, Dad, I'm getting ready to do this and that and all that. And I said, that's all. Now, I was a 20-year military veteran, been there a bunch of times. Mm-hmm. And the call ended with, son, I'm proud of you. I love you. And he said, Dad, I love you too. That was the last conversation we had. So remember, whoever you're speaking to, you never know what's going to happen to them a couple weeks later. But if it had not been for that conversation before he passed, I don't know where I would be today. But I have to reflect on that. So you got to take care of your family, take care of your kids, and have the best relationship that you possibly can.
Welcome back to the episode here on the Hart Hustle Podcast, where we speak to leaders that are truly making a difference and just impacts in their communities and around the world. And today we talk to Marcus. He has left a 20-year military career, worked in government, even SeaWorld, all right, and then walked away to serve Florida's youth. What was that real moment that made you say, Marcus, this is bigger than me?
Oh, geez, when you start realizing the number of children and families that we're impacting across Florida, our strategic numbers and our annual reports will tell the story. We're impacting, anywhere from 50 to 80,000 children and families across the entire state of Florida. But, the other thing is that when you get the report cards, right, when you're hearing the impact that you're making on these kids and these families, when they kind of graduate, if you want to call it that, from the programs and things that they participate in with us, and the positive stories, and then the impact that those folks are also making on the people around them, so sometimes you're just you're working with one family, but that family is influencing other families around them. Right. About, the positive things in life, and you can overcome any obstacle that you're confronted with. You just got to persevere, be patient, and then have a positive attitude towards it. Right. And, so it's just when you see the numbers, I'm talking about numbers of who you've served and who have graduated and succeeded from your programs. Right.
That's
so
actually
that to me,
data you should be looking at. Yeah. That's the data you should be looking at. Guys, this is Marcus Johnson, the CIO officer at Children's Home Security of Florida. From military service to mission-driven leadership, Marcus is really he's bridging that data, that tech, the purpose in a way that's changing lives. And I ask you the first question, man. You've been able to wear a lot of hats, whether that's military, whether that's corporate, public sector. What did those early chapters actually teach you about purpose and leadership?
Oh, yeah, sure. In the military, you're kind of thrust into leadership. It sort of happens by circumstance, right? It's not something that you kind of move into. It just sort of happens, and before you know it, you're either in a formal leadership position, or you're informally leading others one way or another, right? And I think that as I kind of reflect on my career since joining the military, which I joined right out of high school. Young man, naive, immature, the military for me developed that out of me. The military took me and they instilled some values and some belief systems in me that I just didn't have, growing up at home or anything like that. I mean, I don't fault anybody. It's just the environment in which you've grown. Right. And the military brought those things to me. The military instituted the idea of family, and I don't mean, you can be brothers or you can be sisters with others, and it's not blood. It's about mission and a common cause. And as I have grown, over the last 30 years, through all these things, I find that each experience layers into the experience before it. And you find things that are very difficult to work with, 20 years ago are easier to deal with today. The issues of pressure, 25 years ago were more substantial and would cause a lot of doubt and things like that when the pressure would kick in. Now pressure, they happen, but you're able to navigate those pressures a little bit more seamlessly than you were before. So I find that some of those experiences just layer right on top of each other. And, and I always say it's a lesson learned. I put it in my rucksack. It's a proverbial rucksack. So every lesson learned goes into my rucksack, and I carry it around with me all the time. Right. And so when I'm confronted with something, I pull that lesson out of the rucksack and I apply it. I may have to adjust it. You know, you need to adjust your style. You need to adjust your approach, but you know, the theme of what you're doing is consistent, you know, and then that allows me to be a much more authentic person because I'm using the same lessons all the time.
That's
So
it. That's it. And it's good to be the authentic, your real self. That's what really truly makes a difference, especially when you come into the world of giving and, you know, nonprofit space. You have to be authentic self, right? That's what really makes a difference there. I want to take you back to 2019, though. 2019 hits, you walk away from corporate, you start writing, you're speaking, which in reality, not a lot of people do because it takes guts. What was that mindset shift like during that time?
well, you know, I had you know, I'm a man of faith, and so you know I'll move out on faith even if things are a little bit more uncertain, you know, than others. When you
Mhm.
feel that this is the direction you need to go, and you can usually work past those fears and those insecurities of doing it when you know you're following the call, when you're following the calling that you truly feel led to live. And the other thing is you look for those confirmations from others, right? And others unknowingly are making statements to you or observations about you that align with what it is that you're thinking you need to do, which then just gives you more, just boosts your confidence even more. You know, so you know, yeah, and you know, for me, I'm blessed to carry forward a military pension, which kind of can help you know me in if any times of challenges should arise. But it's you're leaving what you're accustomed to and doing something completely different than you have never done before.
Scary.
It
Yeah.
is. It is scary, but you know, it's also exciting and exhilarating at the
It
same time.
is.
But you know, for me, when I did that, there were a lot of you know internal and external factors that fed into that about why I decided in 2019 to walk away. But the it was the right decision at the right time. Did a lot of really cool things and built some additional experiences that I would never have gotten if I had continued the you know more traditional corporate work life, right? So you know, writing a book, I wrote a book in about 3.5 months, whereas if I were working, it would have taken me a year. You know,
Yeah, true.
you know, I learned, you know, anyway, and then, you know, developing your speaking style, you're studying a little bit more on certain topics. And so then when you're speaking to others in my world, I was speaking to, veterans that were suicidal. I was talking to, you know, veterans that had survived suicide, talking with others that are part of Gold Star families and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Men that are just struggling with life, being a man in today's culture, and you know and everything when they talk about the struggles and things that they're having, you're fully prepared because been there, done that, you know, cross that
Yeah,
obstacle. So
those are always the best conversations, you know, especially that's what's so cool about the line of work of nonprofit. You've come across it. You usually get into something because you had a family member, a friend, your own personal
mhm,
experiences that led you to the
sure.
organization. And I actually want to ask you, what even got you when this organization, was it that whisper that got louder in the ear? Or is it an aha moment? Like, this is the organization I want to be a part of? How do you even get aligned
Oh,
after taking that leap of faith to then get here?
so yeah, it's gonna, this may come across, so I don't know how bizarre this is gonna sound, but it is what it is, right? So you know, there's a you know, I felt led to help men that were struggling with duties and responsibilities of manhood, et cetera, military veterans that were struggling with their adaptation to civilian life and military careers and things of that nature. And it was always, but it started to focus back on, you know, how we're raising and dealing with our children, right? So are you serving as a role model for your child that will then break those chains of bond, you know, those chains that is holding a
Mhm.
child back? What example can you set that that child can break free from those proverbial chains and then and be successful in life? And you know, there's a pastor that I followed and I love following. I love listening to him is Tony Evans, right? And he has a book out called The Kingdom Man. You know, and he talks about how do you influence the nation? The nation's in trouble. So how, you know,
Mhm.
how do you deal with that? Well, first off, you start in the house. You start with the family. You get the family built up. Once you get the family built up, you work on your city block. Once you work on your city block, you take care of the city block. You take care of your city. you then take care of the county. And so you take care, and as you take care of each of these things, it then develops, and before you know it, you've taken care of the nation. So, I got that call, it was started with a text message about Children's Home Society, that they were in trouble from a technology perspective. I had turned down things for the previous couple of years, wasn't interested in it at all. And he said, yeah, it's a nonprofit dealing with children, families. He didn't have the full story, but he knew enough that intrigued my attention. I researched CHS, and my wife and I were sitting there on the couch, and we were talking about it, and then we both said at the same time that, yeah, this is something I think I need to do. It's time to go back. And when you think about it, we're dealing with a child, we're dealing with a family, and when you apply that to the kingdom principle of the kingdom man, where you take care of the family, take care of the block, take care of the city, right? Take care of one family, one child at a time. They then influence others around them. You then can take care of your communities, take care of your state, take care of the nation. And so, while I'm not going to impact the nation by any stretch, and I'm not even the one working with these kids and families, my ministry is now to our staff that support CHS. Now, we're a non-faith-based organization. I do want to be clear about that. But my faith is what carries me through. And this is now my ministry, is taking care of others in the context of and helping them with their responsibilities.
And your focus is always never short term, but how do we continue to build long term relationships, right? And you talk about that in the sense of schools and community. How important is it to really start thinking long term instead of short term?
Well, I think that some of what I think CHS has been around for 120 years, by the way, so we were founded in 1902. So we're well established and the biggest organization of this type within the state of Florida. And I think that they've learned a lot of valuable lessons over that, century worth of doing this type of work. And they've evolved, right? They've evolved based on, as cultural conditions change, as economic conditions change, as political climates change, and, globalization started taking over, things of that nature. I think that the one common theme, if you were to go back, is that if you take care of the child, you're, whether it's a boy or a girl or whatever, you're taking care of the future man, the future woman, the future husband, the future wife, who will then become, leaders of their own families, if you will, of their own. So from us, we kind of have that cradle to career mindset where if we can get involved in lives that need it and require it, you can then start instituting positive change early. And then if you provide those changes from cradle all through their lives up until they graduate high school and even potentially into their early college years or their first careers, right? You're there providing a support system for them as they navigate whatever challenges they're dealing with, to allow them to be, successful and productive adults, whatever, and however they personally define productive.
I love that. And we're in a space now where AI is really changing the game. You being in the seat that you're in, right. I can only imagine AI has come across the table plenty of times. What does that look like for CHS? Are you guys implementing AI? Is that something that you even care for?
So yeah, we are exploring and piloting AI. However, the one thing that we're very sensitive to is that we're a human-centric organization. And so, we would never apply AI, that would replace, any type of human activity, if you will, right? And I know some organizations are looking at things like that. We view AI as a way to make us more productive, to help us produce better quality products faster, help us to maybe even execute repetitive tasks, which will then allow us to give us more time to focus on more value add activities. But, the other thing that we're looking for as we think about the next couple of years for us, looking at AI to do some of those machine learning and predictive analytics, right? So based on our history, we can look at economic conditions down to a zip code level, for example. At least this is what our vision calls for. And based on history, based on trends, based on lessons learned, that we would then that kind of make up our database, if you will. In a couple of years, we'll be able to say, if we do this in this zip code, we predict this outcome. If you invest into this program, this is how many dollars it's going to take. This is how much we can use AI to help us build the foundation to start a new program or a new initiative in a community, and then be able to predict the outcome based off of what we have already learned in the past. Those true, valid success metrics, those true and valid success measures. And I think that that's the kind of thing that excites us. We just don't want to focus on the family. We want to focus on community, and if you can take care of the family, that family will end up taking care of the community.
I mean, which is 100% true. Starting from the child, getting some resources for the adult, and what that actually looks like long term, really helping break cycles per se, because
Right.
that's really what it continues is breaking the cycles. What we need to do, and how do you do that? As you mentioned, I got to go first to the
Mhm.
individual to then help the communities break the cycle of what it looked like for so many years.
Sure, sure. And we have a model too that I mean, we provide about 120 different programs throughout the entire state, and it's not a one program fits all. What we're looking at now is community hub models, where depending on the need that a community has, or a family has, or a child has, or even adults, we also help out adults that are dealing with certain things. We can then navigate them and point them to the program that can take care of their issue. And for us, we're not even really interested we're the ones providing the program. We'll partner with other organizations that offer programs.
Hmm.
And if they've mastered that, if that's their niche, then we'll point, those candidates to that other program and, with another organization, because our concern is taking care of the communities, not that we're the ones doing it.
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the podcast, we first want to say thank you. And we also just want to give you a little insight of what we're up to at Francis. Some don't even realize that we're working with organizations to help them use AI to create that real human communication experiences, whether it's actually supporting your families, those patients, or the entire community. We're actually creating tech that connects. Check it out, francis.ai.
Mm-hmm. You really sat at so many different tables when I sit here and think about, and when I was reviewing for this podcast, you led both in the boardrooms and mission rooms. What's one thing the corporate world what could corporate learn from the nonprofit leadership? Because I think there's a stigma on nonprofits as well, and I'm pretty sure you can also attest to that. But what can people learn?
Sure. I wrote an article recently about how IT and philanthropy teams work together in the nonprofits. And having been on the in the for-profit world, as you stated earlier, and as well for non-for-profit, there's sort of a different paradigm. When you're working in a for-profit organization, it's about profits and margins, right? And that's what you're trying to gear towards. Everything's got a revenue tied to it. Either you're increasing revenue or you're reducing operating expenses, which then, increases your margins, for example. In the for-profit world, we're not concerned with profits and margins. We're talking about the degree of impact that you're having on the communities and the families that you're serving. And everything that we do is vested in that direction. The one thing that I would say is, nonprofits might tend to be a little bit more change averse than for-profits. For-profits are always excited about, they're concerned about the customer experience. When I was at SeaWorld, there was, the mission was to ensure that your visitors, your guests, had a wonderful experience, that they could take back and cherish memories, right, with them, and then go back and then want to come back, or word of mouth, share with a neighbor, cousin, friend, whatever, about their experience. So you always focused on the guest experience, and that is true. But it was always focused, why'd you want them to come back? Well, because, you want to make more money, right? You want to have repeat guests. For us, I don't know that we're so excited about having repeat guests. We want people to graduate and succeed and get through whatever program we're offering for them, and then move on. And then word of mouth, hey, you're having troubles? Let me tell you about who I worked with. Come back over here. And then we can then make a more, we can keep increasing the impact on additional folks that require it, right? But anyway, for profits, love change. Nonprofits, not so much, because they've learned to work with less. They've learned to work with little. They've learned to work with reduced resources. And so when you come in my world, and we're now applying kind of that value optimization, that I brought that into CHS, is value optimizing, building value, right? IT is not a cost center. We're that value optimizer. We make your lives better. We make your lives more efficient. I'm talking about the staff, the work staff, right? My job is to help you be successful in your job. I want you to spend, and again, for conversation, I'd rather have our counselors and our workers spend 90% of their time with the families, 10% of the time catching up on data reporting, capturing, and all that, as opposed to, I can only spend 60% of my time with the families because the other 40% I'm working with, technology that's not efficient, doesn't work. And so it's taking me longer to take care of my administrative steps and things of that nature.
So you kind of are in a unique spot because one, as you mentioned, nonprofits could be allergic to change. We see that all the time.
Yep.
How do you lead through that resistance, especially when you're trying to implement on the back end, tech, HR, and finance, really helping them with these back end investments when everyone really wants to focus on the front lines? How do you kind of break through all that?
So we map everything that we do. How does whatever initiative we're doing, how do we map it back to the families we're serving? Finance, I can tie an accounting system and an accounting process back to the families we're providing services for. I can tie talent stuff. I can tie philanthropy things. I could tie anything back. But how you map it back to the families we serve, and how is at the end of the day, how is the family served going to be better with whatever it is that we're implementing? And then that gives you that's where your vision, you're establishing that vision. You're setting a goalpost. You're establishing a different picture in the lives of those that you're working with. So my peers, my colleagues, and others. And so I focus on the outcome, not necessarily so much on the path getting there. Because if I talk about the path getting there, then they get a little nervous. They get a little concerned. It's a lot of work, right? Oh, I got to do this with data. I got to change it. I got to learn something new, that kind of thing. And so I always maintain a kind of more of a positive approach. But think about the outcome. Focus on the outcome. Why are we it's the why. Why are we doing this? And when you keep folks focused on the why, you can generally deflect their mind from the challenge of the change that we're implementing towards the why. Why are we doing this? And that tends to be the most. It doesn't work with everybody, right? But that tends to kind of motivate and kind of instill a certain degree of discipline in folks, with whatever it is that we're implementing.
You've really mentioned through this all, which I kind of got from your leadership, is that you blend faith and leadership in a way that really feels real. Not preachy, which is what people I'm pretty sure enjoy about you. How has faith really shaped your leadership style? If it has, or if it's not, I don't know if it's always been like this. Is it over the years? How have we get here?
Well, sure. I think the one witness to all that could definitely be my wife. Cause I came to Christ later in life. I was pushing 40 years old when I came. So I had built up 40 years worth of behaviors and the way I conducted myself, et cetera. And, but I would say that, and again, it's not a perfect science, right? You go through your ebbs and flows just like anything else. But when it circles back, it has allowed me to be more patient, more, a little bit more resilient. And again, I'm not going to call myself a master of all of this stuff by any stretch, but, how to apply empathy and compassion with what you're doing. So if we're instituting a technology change, having empathy and compassion for the person that's going to be influenced by that change that I understand, and just helping them navigate whatever their fears are. Again, it's not perfect because whenever you bring people into it, people are always going to, influence things one way or another. But no, I think it's allowed me to be more patient, more empathetic, a little bit more controlled. I do like to work really, really fast. That's just my style. And so it also helps me to adapt to the different folks that are around me. And I think it also, there's certain values that I carry with me all the time. I don't even have to think about them. They're just a natural part of my conduct. Yeah. Faith-based values. There's some military values. There's 7 of them that I like to follow as well. And all of those things, as long as I hold true to my values and hold true to my faith, it'll all come out fine in the end, one way or another.
I want to talk about this book, man. You mentioned the book a little bit. My Personal Desert Storm.
That's the name.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
That title alone is just a very deep title. What was the healing process like? Because I can imagine that there was things that was coming out that you probably even know you're dealing with. Like putting that experience on paper, kind of speak to that, man. What was that healing process?
There's some people go through it. A lot of folks do it, whether you're a faith-based person or not. A lot of folks like to journal. And so, journaling is sort of a healing process, right? Whatever is grieving you, whatever is giving you concern, whatever you're afraid of or whatever, journaling about it and just talk like you're, on a journal just kind of helps, it's a little therapeutic in its own. So in 2019, when I walked away, I'd already decided I had maintained a journal during Operation Desert Storm. And so I had always kind of felt that someday I was going to take that journal and just kind of transcribe it into some form of book. I didn't know what it would look like, how I would do it, or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I felt that call to do was to take my journal, write it down in a book, and then contrast that with the man that I am today. So when I wrote that book, I was 20, 21 years old, something like that, very immature.
I was gonna say that's a whole different life right
Oh
there.
yeah, very immature. But a lot of weird and odd things occurred to me. And the one thing that I've always said is that when I left Saudi Arabia, in 1991, I went through a life pivot, and it wasn't a faith-based change, but it was the beginning towards my odyssey, the odyssey that I was about to undertake. And, but a lot of weird things happened to me during that conflict. I was there for about 6 months, and it changed me. I became more professional, more focused. I was investing, that's when I started going to college. So that war changed me. And it was sort of the start. So, but anyway, and then it kind of fast forward to 2008 when I got born again in Labor Day weekend of 2008. So that was 17 years later, I guess, after Desert Storm. Look, age matures you by itself. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But anyway, so I blogged a lot. And so I took some of the articles I was writing, and then as I would write down one day experience in Desert Storm for my journal, I would then include an article that I wrote today. And so you can see the way I wrote in 1991, wow. And so each day of my Desert Storm journal, I then inserted a journal each day in my Christian life, compares and contrasts. That was the first book I wrote. I told you early on that when I walked away in 2019, I just felt that call to do that. And that was the very first book. I've written 3. That was the first book I wrote. Wow. That book is still to this day sells the most. It won a first place award for 2020 as the best memoir for 2020. So it really took off. It's not my favorite, ironically, because I really did it to learn the publishing game. Right. Mm-hmm. But it continues to this day to be the most. So my personal Desert Storm is sort of an analogy on Operation Desert Storm that I was a part of, but then the internal conflict that I fought and struggled with for another 20 years. So my personal Desert Storm coinciding with the war, Operation Desert Storm. And that's where my personal Desert Storm came out of that.
I like it, man. And it really helps on the mindset space, and I think that's the place that people need to tap into. There's a thing that changes when you just mentally are in a better place, when you understand yourself, right? When you understand patience. And I would tell you, it's probably having kids is what kind of got me into patience. I learned a lot of patience becoming a dad, right? Because these kids, but I'm in a space where I decided what I was realizing is that a mindset journal was needed. And because of my audience being the C-suite execs and the leaders and entrepreneurs, business owners, I also realized that we get into a space sometimes of holding a title and almost forgetting who we are. Yeah. Because we show up, 50, 60 hours a week as a CEO, as a, vice president, and forgetting what really got you to that level. So I created this 30-day journey, talk about journaling, because it helps when you write it. It helps when you see it, when you have these affirmations, these prompts. So, just, and listen, I'm doing my first one. You say, this is not your favorite. I'm like, oh my God, I can't even believe I'm doing this. So I can imagine you felt the same way, like, oh my God, am I really writing a book?
Well, my wife was a little bit worried at the beginning because I'm very vulnerable in the book, but the other thing I want to show men is I grew up, I was special ops in the military, and there was a certain way that you had to conduct yourself and carry yourself, in the military. And you could be vulnerable with your military brother, but you can't be vulnerable with anybody else. And I think that it's the idea that men feel like they can't be vulnerable is sort of holding us back. And sometimes when you're vulnerable, it's like a pressure release, right? When you're sharing. And that's what I found when I was doing a lot of the Celebrate Recovery speeches. And when you're talking to folks that are suicidal or surviving suicide, or that have survived suicide attempts, that it's just the ability, it's just people they just want someone to listen, but they want someone to listen that understands, right? It's different when you're talking to somebody that understands than when you're like, I can't talk about work with my wife. I can talk to her about work all day long, but she doesn't understand. But what I can do is talk to a colleague. a colleague understands. And sometimes you're just looking for someone to listen. That's it.
That's it. I have to tell that to my wife sometimes because I'm pretty sure, like your wife, they always have the answers, right? That's it. So I tell my wife something that she starts to give me the answer. I'm like, wait, I was just venting love. As much as I would love, I just wanted to get this off my chest, just to speak about it, because sometimes she could go down the rabbit hole and it's like, what are you talking about? That's not how it goes. Or that's not how so I 100% hear you on that. If there's a leader out there who's got a story, but is scared to share it, what would you say to them?
I would tell them if they've got a story, whether it doesn't hurt you to start writing it down, just start writing it down, I can't remember one of the things about, when you're in Christian journaling, it's in the book of Hosea. I can't remember the chapter or verse, but it talks about, he went to the mountaintop and wrote it down. How do we have the words of the prophets today? Because they wrote it down, so I think write it down. And then maybe you'll overcome your fear a little bit later, or write it down and share it with somebody, get their feedback and thoughts on it. But if they've got a story to tell, I think that's how we heal others, by sharing our testimonials, by sharing our stories. But it's who you give devotion to, right? At the end of the day, that who is it that got you through the testimonial?
That's always huge to really think about. I love life, man. You talk about how, you get wiser with age, but through life experiences, you also get wiser and you get better, hopes. Not everyone, takes life experiences and sees the good in them. Good or bad, you see there's a benefit in there. Even when you're down and you fail, there's a good in there. You got to figure out what that looks like. And you just knocked them out the park every single time, man.
We try, at the end of the day, I can tell the Lord I ran the race. It's, and there you go. Right.
Yeah, you're right. Man, if you could, if people that are listening right now, they're still watching, how could someone make an impact? And I'm not just talking about donating, but how can they get involved in the organization to truly make that big impact?
Yeah, sure. Well, we have a lot of volunteers that do work for us, and they do a lot of things. They'll help. We do food deliveries. We collect food. We collect a lot of what we call gift in kind. So but you've got to be able to pull those things together and then organize them and ensure that when you're giving them out to whatever family or child or whatever that is going to receive it, we need a lot of volunteers to help with that, right? And sometimes it's just providing that assistance to the counselor or to the transporter or to the individual that's dealing with those those kids and families. And but yeah, we have a very big volunteer base throughout the whole state, and we got volunteers doing all kinds of different things, even doing things around the building, so that so cool. So that the team members don't have to worry about doing that later, whatever it is, whatever maintenance activities or whatever is going on in that building at that time, if that makes sense. So yeah, we have volunteers quite a bit, and also sharing the message with their leaders, their community leaders and their legislators, that we need to push more into the services that provide these services to the kids and families, right? So if they're connected to political leaders, and they think that they've got a good relationship with them, great. Speak to them about the types of services that CHS does, Children's Home Society. Mm-hmm. And again, we're in schools, we're all over the place doing all kinds of things. Whether it's us or about another organization, get the politicians involved so that they can institute legislative things or approve, budgets or whatever it requires, right? To help facilitate these services. So you can influence your community leaders and your political leaders.
Yeah. Listen, I told you that by the time we were finishing, you wouldn't even realize that we were on doing this for 30 plus minutes. So I got a couple of questions before we wrap this up. The first one is, if you had to sum up on the why behind everything you do in one sentence, what would it be?
The spirit of giving back. For me, I've been blessed in my life. I've done a lot of cool things, got paid to do a lot of fun stuff. But to me, it's the spirit of giving back, the spirit of making your community better. I know that's more than one sentence, but it's good. The spirit of giving back.
I like it. I got the sentence, and you just want to elaborate. That's all good. So this is the blind question, man. This is the leader in the hot seat, figure out what they're going to say. And let's say that 10 years from now, a young adult walks up to you and says, I'm one of the kids CHS has helped, and now I'm paying it forward. what do you hope they remember about how your work changed their life?
So so one more time.
Yeah. So let's say a young kid
Yeah.
walks up, recognizes you and says, "Hey man, I was one of the kids and now I'm paying it forward." What do you hope they remember about the work that you did to change their life?
Oh, good Lord. Yeah. So, what was it? Yeah. So I would like to, what was it about my influence on you that has allowed you to become the positive influence you are today? What was the good? What was the bad? What would you do differently? We're not perfect. We're imperfect individuals. We don't always get it right. So what did I do right? What did I do? What did I do that was good that influenced you? But what did I do that might have missed the mark? And then how would you take that lesson and apply it to what you're going to do moving forward?
That's a good, and I think it's actually a good leadership tactic. When I left corporate, that's one of the things he asked me. He's like, "Man, I'm so bummed that you're leaving. And you know what? Out of everybody that we had to furlough, I think I don't worry about you. You'll do great things. But what was it about me that, because we bumped heads, he knew that.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about me that just didn't work out? And when someone asks that, it's actually a really good question in hopes that they actually take it for the good, right? But that was a really good question to be asking. You just mentioned it.
Well, in the military, you're confronted with a lot of leaders, good leaders and bad leaders. And you can learn from bad ones just like you can from good ones, because from the good ones, you're learning what to do. From the bad ones, you're learning what not to do. Yeah. Right? So you can learn from good ones and bad ones.
What's funny is that I feel that I don't have my father in my life, but that's how I look at my father. It's like, listen, he wasn't a great father, but he was, right? Because I get to learn everything he did not do. And I win by just showing up, to be quite honest with you. But, I still get to see how, listen, as long as you show up, you're doing a difference. And now having to everything that I add on top of that, I'm a good father.
Well, it's funny. My father lived in Arizona. I lived in Tennessee. And this was around 2009. I just bought a plane ticket, flew out to Arizona. My dad had no idea it was coming, showed up at the door. And he's like, what are you doing here? And I said, Dad, I just flew out here to tell you one thing. He said, what's that? And I said, Dad, I forgive you. That was it. I flew out there, all the way out there, to tell him face to face that I forgive him. And then we just had a weekend watching, Gunsmoke and different. He was a Western guy, so we watched Westerns, that weekend. I flew home.
That's cool. Yeah. So you and your dad still have a relationship?
My dad passed away in 2017, but that was sort of a turnaround moment, for us. And I lost my own son. My son was in the Air Force, and he passed away in 2011. Oh man, sorry to hear that. But what got me through that was my son and I had a conversation 2 weeks before he passed. He was in the Middle East at the time, and what helped me get through it was, we had a conversation. He said, Dad, I'm getting ready to do this and that and all that. And I said, that's all. Now, I was a 20-year military veteran, been there a bunch of times. Mm-hmm. And the call ended with, son, I'm proud of you. I love you. And he said, Dad, I love you too. That was the last conversation we had. So remember, whoever you're speaking to, you never know what's going to happen to them a couple weeks later. But if it had not been for that conversation before he passed, I don't know where I would be today. But I have to reflect on that. So you got to take care of your family, take care of your kids, and have the best relationship that you possibly can.
100%. I do agree. I tell my wife all the time, man, communication, being open, being yourself. And I didn't experience that. So now being able to provide that to, my young ones, that's all I care for, man. Mm-hmm. I know it's not about me. As soon as you become a parent, it's not about you anymore, right? Your sleep, nothing. They don't care about your money. They don't care about any of that. Yeah. So I'm starting to really see that in my life, that it's not about me, but it's about what we do, not in just our homes, even on the outside, because our kids are watching that.
Well,
too.
Remember, your kids are your legacy.
Yeah.
The kids are your legacy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, listen, we could keep talking about this, Marcus. I told you we were going to have a good time. Yeah. What is your blind question for the next leader? How about that?
So that was the one I was prepared for. So this is my question: what is one innovative approach that you have implemented in your organization that has significantly improved your impact on the community?
That's a really good one, and it's a good one because when you talk about nonprofits, innovation just sometimes is not there. So I would love to see.
Oh my God, you got to be creative. You got to be creative in a nonprofit. You don't have the same resources, so you got to be innovative.
I agree. Well, Marcus, I want to say thank you for your service. Thank you for your son's service. Unfortunately, we did lose him, but thank you for risking your lives, man. You've been a risk taker since day one. That right there, time someone signs up, it's a risk you take because you don't know if you come back home, and with God's gracious, you did, and your son wasn't. So I'm it's kind of, as a father, it's hard to even have this conversation. But thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for everything your son do. Thank you for having this time and pouring into us today. And thank you for life happening the way it has. For now, you're in a nonprofit, really changing lives, man. You've always been changing lives when you think about it. You've been impacting lives since you were in the military, man. That's how life just came back. We thank you for those that are watching, those that are still here. Please make sure you guys do share, comment, and like these stories. That when we start to really speak about authentic selves, it's what we really walk. It's how we walk our lives. And I think you should do the same. If you guys want to be a part of an organization, there's so many organizations that need people like yourself, volunteers. And if you love something, I can guarantee you there's an organization out there that is waiting for you to call them. So we thank you here from the Hart Hustle Podcast. We thank you, Marcus Johnson, for being here with us, another great leader on the Hart Hustle Podcast. We'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thank you, Frank.
Later.